think that that is going to bring us into it. Hopefully that's perfect. Okay. Well, Judit, we got through that together. Little technical difficulties.
I have nothing to do with it.
Thank you everyone so much for being patient. We had a little bit of a technical issue. I had to contact IT. They sent us over the link, and now we are good to go. So yes, thank you for attending. I'm Nathan Lewis. I'm the coordinator for academic support on the Collier campus. I'm one of the Holocaust Memorial Committee members. And today I'm very honored to be able to sit down and have an interview with Judit Price. She's been so patient. Thank you so much for sitting with me during that little period of time. And yeah, the first thing that I just wanted to do is start off with some questions. So yeah, how are you doing today? It's the first one.
I'm good, thank you.
Awesome. So first of all, tell us, when were you born?
March 1st, 1944.
And where were you born?
I was born in Budapest, Hungary.
So tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, I'm an only child. I have no siblings. My mother and father survived the Holocaust in Hungary. My grandparents did not. What would you like to know? Exactly.
What about what did they do for like a living, and a little bit about their background?
Yeah, all right. Well, my father's family come from a small town close to the Czech Republic, and they were shopkeepers. They had a coat store with manufacturing coats, overcoats, Loden coats. And my mother's family, they were pretty successful, I would say more of the upper class than the middle class. My father was middle class, my mother was more of an upper class. Her father died in First World War. He was a captain of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he died as a captain in the First World War. And my mother's mother, my grandmother, remarried this very wealthy, successful man who had several liquor factories in Budapest and Vienna. And my mother spent many years of her childhood with governesses in Vienna and Budapest. They have two homes. So they, my grandfather even bought papers that he wasn't Jewish, but of course it didn't matter at all. But he was hoping he could assimilate enough, then he won't get persecuted by the Nazis. And my grandmother, my grandfather died of natural causes. Actually, he had stomach cancer. My step grandfather, stomach cancer, and he couldn't get any help and any medicine and any medical support. So that's why he died. He probably wouldn't have died. I mean, those days were different than today. Today, you wouldn't have died from it. My grandmother was killed by the Nazis. She was visiting my mother, her daughter, at Swedish safe houses, which were provided by the Swedish Red Cross, and Swedish diplomat named Raul Wallenberg from Stockholm came to Hungary, especially to Budapest, to save the Jews. And that's how my mother and I survived, living in the safe houses. And my grandmother was visiting my mother in the safe houses, and she was, I guess, was a few minutes after curfew, and the Hungarian Nazis rounded her up and marched her to the Danube, and he was shot into the river in February. Oh no, I'm sorry, it wasn't February. It was in November. It was in November. It was cold and naturally, and so today there is a memorial at the Danube on the embankment of the Danube of the shoes of those Hungarian martyrs who were killed by the Nazis. Their shoes was taken, to take it. They took it from them, and later it was bronzed, and it's a memorial now on the Danube River, on the banks. That's how my grandmother died, and my mother survived because of lived in the Swedish protected houses for children and pregnant women and women with babies. My father was in a slave labor camp on his way to Auschwitz, and he jumped off the train, and he hid in the forest till he found a Hungarian peasant cottage, and he was protected by this Hungarian farmer till another neighboring farmer found out that my father was hiding there, and he reported him to the authorities, and he was captured again. But that was already toward the end of the war, so they didn't send him back to Auschwitz, but put him to a slave labor camp in Hungary, where he was digging ditches for the Nazis to escape if the Russians came. So the underground. So
it was up until Russian liberation that he was at that slave labor camp.
Right. The slave labor camp was in Budapest and helping was getting built for the German Nazis and Hungarian Nazis to escape the Russians, because the Russians were on the border already.
You mentioned a man named Raul Wallenberg.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit more about him and your mother?
He was a Swedish diplomat, and he was sent to Budapest by a Swedish-Hungarian Jewish man who felt that Raul was a very good candidate for this job of saving Hungarian Jews, and he ended up saving close to 90,000 Jews in Hungary for different situations, different methods, and mostly he was printing these passes called Schutzpass, and that meant if you had a Schutzpass, that meant that you were under the protection of the Swedish legation or embassy, and you were protected by the Swedes, so you weren't marched to the gas chamber. And it lasted for a while, and then of course the Germans caught on, and then it kind of repudiated and didn't accept it. And Eichmann came in, Adolf Eichmann, who was a very famous killer. He massacred the Jews, and he was brutalist of killing innocent civilians, women, children, men, whoever he could find. And but Raul Wallenberg was able to save, in spite of Eichmann and the other Nazis in Hungary, in Budapest or Hungary, close to 90,000 Jews through his very courageous and very smart and humanitarian techniques.
That's incredible. And so your mom and you as a young baby were living
Right.
in
As an infant. I was an infant. Yeah.
infant living in a safe house with this man for how long was that?
Well, I was born in March, and my mother, that started to get things started to speed up with because the Budapest, since Hungary was a part of the Austro-Hungarian, German, the ally, this coalition, they didn't really bother Hungary for a long time. They let especially Budapest. The Jews in Budapest survived longer than the Jews from the countryside. And I don't know what was I saying. Um, so oh yeah. So my mother, when I was born, actually, I was born in a hospital, and the ambulance took her because my father was already in a slave labor camp. But my mother went on the ambulance to have me in the hospital. And when she came back, then things started to speed up with the Nazis, and she was hiding in the building, in the apartment building, which she and her parents owned. With many other apartment buildings they owned. Of course, they never saw anything of it. They took it away from them, and they never got anything back. But anyways, she was hiding in that basement in a cellar with me for March through I think was about through maybe August, September, something like that, and then Raul Wallenberg came in July, and he started his safe houses in August. So I think that's when my mother moved in there, and that's how she survived.
I have a question in the chat really quick from Ashraf. He's asking, after the war, Judit, were you able to learn more about what happened to the rest of your family?
Well, and like I said, I had a very small family. I like I said, I had no siblings. My mother had a stepbrother who was sent to the Ukraine, and he ended up coming back, and he was fighting on the Russian side in the Ukraine, but he did end up escaping, and somehow he got back. But I have three uncles who, for my father's side, one went to Italy because he was Jewish and he couldn't go to medical school. He wanted to be a physician, and under Mussolini, he was able to, that time was able to still attend medical school and in Padua, and he lived there. And my other uncle was saved by his future wife in an attic in her apartment building. My uncle never left the house for a year. He was saved and was hiding in the attic by his fiancée, who was later became his wife. And my fourth uncle was shot to death on the street when they were rounding up the Jews in the same time when my grandmother died. The same situation.
Well, let me get back to your father. So he was in a slave labor camp until the Russian liberation in April of 1945. So
Right.
how did your parents feel about the Soviets coming in after the Nazis? What were their
The
feelings?
Russians were horrible, absolutely horrible. They raped women, they looted people's homes. They took liberty of shooting anyone they did not like. I mean, they were a fraction better than the Nazis, but not much better. I remember my mother telling me that she was a young, very attractive woman in 45. And when she went out to get provisions or get some food, she had to camouflage herself and put flour in her hair to look gray, babushka in her head, like a scarf thing, old frumpy clothes, not to get raped and harassed and violated by the Russian soldiers because they were brutal. Just like today, we see it in Ukraine. I mean, what's the difference, 70 years later?
Yeah, that's interesting. So going from a life under Nazis and Hitler to a life under Stalin.
Into the Stalin, right?
Yeah.
Who was a brutal monster himself.
What did your father do after his business was stolen?
He started up again with his brother. The two of them started a company, a store, a coat manufacturing store, just like their father did it in Hungary, in that small town. He and his brother started to open up a business, but of course it wasn't approved by the communists. You can, they called him capitalist, and you can't have your own business. You have to work for the state, and you can't be a charge of your own life according to the communist, socialist Russians and Hungarians. So he did it in with his brother for, let's see, I was 16 when they nationalized it. They took it away from him. So he actually did it. He had his business for 16 years by pretending that he was a poor tailor who had a little shop, in the city. And actually there was a nice street, and he was sewing them himself. So what he did, he had like 20 sewers in the city, and every morning would get into a cab and collect the coats from his sewers and bring it to the store for the people who ordered them. They picked it up, and he had a sewing machine and a couple of unfinished coats hanging in case the communist come in, that they could see that he's the tailor. He's the one who's sewing the coats, when it wasn't true. He had 20 or 25 people outside, and they were paid very well, so they didn't denounce my father. My father took good care of them, and they made these coats that was able to sell by pretending that he wasn't a capitalist. He was just a solo, small little tailor.
Interesting. Like he's working on the black market,
right,
kind of.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I see here
of course,
that it
I was
says,
a kid. So I was a kid, so I didn't really register with me. I just know that that's what he did, and was normal to
right.
me, those days. Now I look back and said, "Oh my God,
that's interesting.
What a heroic thing they did." Yeah.
Now, I'm seeing here that it says that he couldn't travel. What was the reasoning for that? Why wasn't he able to travel?
The Russians, the communists didn't let families travel to the West because they were afraid they're not coming back. I mean, in 56, a lot of 1956 was during the revolution. And now I am looking at the TV at Ukraine, and of course this is a much larger revolution. It's a war. What Budapest had was just a revolution, but many people escaped and left Budapest to move to the West, to Vienna, and come to the United States and Canada or whatnot, because they didn't want to live under Russian occupation.
And when did you guys leave communist Hungary?
Okay. Well, I was 21. I just finished college, and my father, after his business was nationalized by the communists in Budapest, and they finally realized that he was a capitalist. He wasn't the one who's sewing the coats. they realized that it was all a fraud. It was a lie. My uncle was thrown into jail. Actually, my father was not, but my uncle was thrown into jail because of the lie, because they felt that he was cheating, lying. But he wasn't there very long. They let him out in a couple of weeks. And then my father was in his, he was older. He was close to 60 by then, I think, late 50s. So nobody was going to hire him. He never worked for anyone. He always had his own business. So he worked on the black market, and he smuggled money out from Budapest to the west, to Switzerland. His money, his family's money, his brothers, and also his friends. So that's how he lived. That's how, my father earned his living, that he was in the black market smuggling money. And then he realized that, it's gonna be an end, and he's gonna go to jail, and he was older. And so he said, I have to leave. So there was 65, and was a little bit easier to get passports, but not very easy, just a little bit, I think. So he got a passport to go visit his brother in Italy, who left during Mussolini to become a physician. And of course, there was no internet and no computers and, tracking. So my mother applied for a passport and with me. And of course, they couldn't trace that my father wasn't back yet. So she was allowed to get a passport to visit her relatives in Austria, in Vienna, because she had relatives in Vienna. So we were able to leave. So after 2 months, my father left Budapest, my mother and I left. And we all emigrated to Germany. Those days were West Germany. And that's where actually I met my husband, whom I married to for 56 years. But that's where my parents lived in Germany till they died.
So it says here, when you got to Germany, you went to the Jewish community and attended a youth group. And
right.
So what happened there?
I met I met a fellow, an American GI, who was in civilian clothes because he was in Army intelligence. And he decided he fell in love with me the first time. And he decided he's going to marry me. And I had other engaged and other, not engaged, I wasn't engaged, but I had other boyfriends in different countries. At those days, I was young and I was attractive. So I wasn't really, plus I didn't want to come to America. I didn't want to leave Europe and with my parents. So it took him a lot of work to get rid of the other boyfriends. And he finally won, and we were married 6 months later, actually.
Wow, that's awesome. And your family, how many children do you have?
I have 3. I have 2 boys and a girl.
Awesome.
But they are adults. They all grown up.
And you have grandchildren as well?
I have 3 little girls. I mean, I have 2 little girls and 1 older girl.
Awesome.
1 in their 20s. I have 3 granddaughters.
So your husband, I'm assuming you guys moved back to America.
Yes, yeah. So I met my husband in Düsseldorf, Germany. And we left after maybe 3 or 4 months. He had to finish his time at the army, because it was a time for him, a time frame. He didn't get to Vietnam because when they were sending people to Vietnam, he was married, and those days didn't send people who were married to Vietnam. So I keep telling him that he can thank his life to me, because if he wasn't married to me, he would have been shipped to Vietnam. So and then we left and we came back to Massachusetts, where his family was. And then we lived in Massachusetts for till 6 years ago, till we moved here for a long time. Excellent. 50 years we lived in Massachusetts.
That's a long time. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you were in America, I see a little bit about your education. Would you mind sharing with us?
Sure. I mean, I went to university in Budapest, but I never got my degree because we left when I was 21. So My father didn't want me to wait for my graduation. I never went to the graduation. I never got my diploma. I did finish the year, but I never, never had any proof of that. So when I came here, I spoke 5 languages. So I wanted to do something with my language skills. But there we lived in outside of Boston, a small town. I had 2 little children by then. I had children right away, and just was no opportunity for me to do anything with languages. So I decided to go back and get another degree, and I got a degree. And so I had my first degree was in languages. Actually, it was in English and German. And then when I went back to school in a Boston area, I got a degree in counseling psychology. And then I got a job and worked with women in abused and disadvantaged women, and that was very stressful, and I was very depressed doing that kind of work. So I decided that I don't want to do that anymore. I went to get a master's, and I got another master's and opened up my own business. And I had a company for 35 years, human resources related. I did executive coaching, career management, resume, job search, interviewing, that sort of things.
Interesting.
And I did that 35 years and I retired. It's about 6-7 years ago. Then we moved to Naples.
Oh, very cool. Do you think your experience in Budapest under the Nazis and Wallenberg guided your choice of profession?
Well, I don't know anything about Wallenberg and Nazis except, hearsay and from what I read and what I heard from my parents and whatnot. But I grew up under the communists, and I like I said, languages was my love. That's what it was. I really wanted to do, work at the UN or, something like that, be an interpreter. I forgot to say that when I was in Hungary, while I was going to school, I was also working at the Indonesian embassy. I was the secretary, was to the press attaché. So while I was going to school at night, and during the day I worked, and the weekend I was a tour guide. So I was 18 and 19, and I made more money than my parents did as working at the embassy. And I had a very important job. I was very young. I don't even know how. I was 19 years old. I was working for the Indonesian press attaché, and I was his assistant, translator, interpreter.
Wow.
So, and then I did that till we left Budapest, till my mother and I emigrated, defected to the West. I worked at the embassy. So languages was always so why I went to get psychology and counseling, I don't know. I always liked people, and I was fascinated with Freud and Jung and all those psychotherapists, and I was interested in psychology and the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that would be a good degree, but I was actually as a therapist. I was a psychotherapist at one point, and that's when I worked with this disadvantaged women, which I just really couldn't handle emotionally, psychologically, and decided to work as use counseling, but in a work environment, with employment field.
Well, I guess just a couple of final questions.
Sure.
When it comes to Wallenberg, what are maybe some of your final thoughts and feelings about his effect on your life? I mean, it seems like you were very young. You never really interacted with him, but you at least maybe you can talk a little bit about your thoughts and feelings.
Well, he was an amazing man. He was only 35, I think he was 34 or 35 when he was sent to Budapest. And he was just, I mean, it just, is my thought. I mean, I just only have good thing and praise and admiration and love for a man who sacrificed his own life. And he was not Jewish. He had, the rumor says that his great grandfather had some Jewish blood. So I mean, he was not Jewish, and he didn't do it because he was afraid for his own family. Actually, his family comes from a very aristocratic family, a very wealthy family in Stockholm, who owned the steel factories and manufactured a lot of anything in metal and steel, and supplied it to the Nazis, to Germany. They were in cahoots with the Nazis. Actually, his family is one part of the family, and he tragically died because of the Russians claimed that he was a spy. Then he basically spied for the Americans, and they lured him into the Soviet embassy after the war, and with a pretext of having a meeting, and they never let him out. And he went to Lubyanka, which is the Russian prison, like ours, what do you call the Rikers in New York, or Guantanamo, Cuba. So he was in Lubyanka, and they shot him, and the family didn't really did anything. His cousins, his mother tried to do, but she really didn't have a chance to. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but it is such a shame that a man like him died and was shot by the Russians because they didn't like that he was saving Jews, basically. And Russians were always anti-Semites, and they always will be.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Well, what message would you like the students to know? Maybe like a final thoughts for them.
Well, my final thought is to remember that there was a Holocaust. There are people in this country and other countries trying to deny it. There is no Holocaust, and there were who's that? I forgot the name. Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever. She said that that's a makeup. It's not true. And not only her, but other people. And just want, if this generation, we are all dying, God, and the next generation is the one who has to carry the torch and say, yes, there was a Holocaust. 60 million people died. Not only Jews, they died gypsies and people, Romans, Roman people, homosexual, gender issue, people with gender issues. That is, a lot of other people died, communists, a lot of people died, but 6 million died, most of them were Jews. And just remember that, and don't allow anyone to negate that and deny that it wasn't true, and didn't happen. It happened, and it's a tragedy, and hatred is horrible. And just because you have different skin color or different religion or different way your eye looks or whatever, it's still a human being, and you have to look at people as they are, and not their skin color or hair color or country of origin is, but look at them as humans, and try to live in peace with people, and remember that hatred is horrible. It's just hating somebody and hating people for who they are. I think it's one of the worst thing ever could happen to people.
Well, thank you so much. I have a few people in the chat that are also just wanting to say thank you for sharing your story. This is so important to hear stories like these and to recognize that the Holocaust does in fact exist, especially like you're saying, there are a lot of deniers. It seems like it's more relevant than ever for us to have this kind of Holocaust education. So sincerely, thank you for sharing your time with us and
Yeah.
sharing your story.
I just want one more thing is you mentioned education. That is the most important thing. Because if you're educated and you learn and you ask questions and you find if you do research and you find out you see that it happened and education is really is the key. No educated people would ever deny the Holocaust, and education in every level. And even just looking back at me, if I didn't learn languages as I was growing up, and languages wasn't, I probably wouldn't have met my husband because he wouldn't have talked to me if I didn't speak English. I wouldn't have gotten to the United States. I couldn't have done all the things I've done. So education learning is so important. Stay in school and get your degrees.
Excellent. Thanks again. Thank you everybody for stopping by, and have a great day. And try to attend some more events happening this week. Check out the website, www.fsw.edu/Holocaust. Easy to access the site, and you'll see the events calendar, the schedule from there. So try to attend as many events as you can and learn more. So thanks again.